When Sanai Takaichi assumed the office of Japan's prime minister, it became not only a milestone in domestic Japanese politics, but also a key moment in the diplomatic relationship between Tokyo and Washington. According to The Guardian, she is on track to become Japan's first female prime minister, and even at the stage of coalition formation, it was clear that her policies would differ sharply from those of her predecessors. On one hand, in her first phone call with US President Donald Trump, she firmly stated that the alliance with the United States remains a top priority of her foreign and defense policy. "I told him," Takaichi said, "that strengthening the US-Japan alliance is the main mission of my cabinet." Moreover, her government announced an accelerated increase in defense spending, aiming to reach the 2% of GDP threshold by March 2026 instead of the original 2027 schedule. These steps are inevitably seen as Japan's willingness, under its new leadership, to play a more active role in the US strategic architecture in the Pacific region. And this is where the story becomes interesting and tense. Takaichi has demonstrated a much tougher and more independent stance on trade. According to Reuters insiders, during one of her recent phone sessions with Trump, the Japanese side rejected several American trade proposals. The Prime Minister emphasized that Japan will not become a subject of manipulation in trade matters, and that Tokyo intends to defend its trade sovereignty. One Tokyo source said Trump was somewhat shocked that Japan was not simply agreeing, but firmly defending its position, according to insider information shared with The Guardian. This duality, strengthening military cooperation while asserting trade independence, places relations between the two countries in a state of uncertainty. For the United States, Japan has traditionally been a stable ally, purchasing American weapons, participating in joint exercises, and hosting strategic bases. However, Takaichi's policy sends two parallel signals. "We are with you on defense, but we will not automatically follow your trade directives." Such dualism creates the possibility of both strengthening the alliance and increasing friction where economic interests intersect. Interestingly, within Japan's party establishment, and among Washington analysts, there is already talk that Takaichi intends to revise, or at least review, key trade agreements with the United States. A senior Washington diplomat told The Guardian that now we are dealing not just with a partner, but with one who wants equal standing in the discussion, not just to receive instructions. From Washington's perspective, the motives behind this position are clear. On one hand, Washington welcomes Japan's increased defense role amid growing Chinese and North Korean threats. On the other, it dislikes being refused or challenged by an ally asserting its own conditions. For Trump, who is accustomed to being the leading and dominant partner, Japan's independence may be perceived as a challenge. Meanwhile, Japanese media, citing Le Monde, emphasize that the new cabinet is facing a diplomatic test at its very first meetings. This situation can be described as balancing on the edge. The Japanese side, through Takaichi, understands that a deterioration in relations with the United States bodes nothing good in terms of security. Japan remains dependent on the American military presence, on US security guarantees, and on US-Japan cooperation in missile defense, intelligence, and naval coordination. Yet from a trade perspective, it also understands that continued dependence or concessions could undermine its sovereignty and national interests, especially amid domestic economic stagnation and rising nationalism. In this situation, Takaichi is choosing a middle path. She is strengthening defense, which satisfies Washington, but at the same time she is signaling that Japan is not a puppet and not an automatic executor. Japan now finds itself in an interesting trap. On one hand, Takaichi's new policy reinforces national defense and strengthens the security alliance with the United States, sending a signal that Japan is ready to take on a greater share of responsibility for regional order. On the other hand, her tough stance on trade shows that she is not prepared to play second fiddle without a voice of her own. This dualism, tightening the alliance while asserting greater independence, creates an area of uncertainty. What does this uncertainty mean in practice? First, the United States may begin demanding that Japan take on a more active role and greater financial commitments in defense and regional security. If Tokyo continues to appear as a good ally in the military sphere, but keeps blocking US economic or trade initiatives, that could lead to mistrust. Second, Japan may find itself drawn into contradictions between the United States and China or other countries where economic and security interests intersect. If Tokyo tries to maintain friendly economic relations with Beijing while preserving security alignment with Washington, it will require extremely delicate diplomacy. Third, the domestic political sustainability of a strong defense and hardline trade approach will require sacrifices. If the economy suffers, or Japanese businesses feel pressure, internal opposition will rise, and cracks may appear within the US-Japan alliance. According to insiders from Japanese and American intelligence circles, Takaichi intends to use this moment, when the United States is focused on China, the Indo-Pacific region, and Ukraine, to redirect attention toward Japan as a strategic partner, but not as a subordinate. One Japanese analyst told The Guardian, "She is saying we are ready to be your left flank, but not your pawn." And while America might welcome that as a strategic opportunity, the imbalance between Japan's military readiness and its economic autonomy could become a source of tension. For the American side, this period will likely be one of the most testing, an examination of whether Japan is ready to move faster, stronger, and more actively in the military strategic field, while keeping its economic cooperation steady and not becoming the object of a separate trade policy that conflicts with US interests. For Japan, the challenge will be just as delicate, to carefully navigate the line between being a reliable ally and an independent national player. The question will often arise, where is the boundary between partnership and subordination? Interestingly, Japanese media and foreign commentators are already discussing the possibility that Japan might begin purchasing more American weapons, not only to strengthen its defense, but also as a political gesture toward Washington. For example, there is talk of Japan buying American Ford F-150 trucks as a symbolic act of accepting US industry, even if such a move would be impractical given Japan's infrastructure. These symbolic gestures often serve as a litmus test. If Japan shows commitment in defense, it is seen as a sign of friendship. If it resists in economic matters, it becomes a sign of independence. The key focus in the coming months will be the first in-person meeting between Prime Minister Takaichi and the US President, negotiations on the defense alliance, Japan's likely participation in American strategic initiatives, and parallel talks on trade agreements, technology exchange, and investment. If setbacks occur in these areas, for instance, if Japan rejects a major American procurement proposal or denies access to its market for a US company, it could provoke a sharp reaction from Washington. But if both sides move toward each other and find a meaningful compromise, Japan could reap substantial benefits: an enhanced role, greater prestige, and improved trade and defense conditions. In summary, relations between the United States and Japan are now in a state of multi-layered uncertainty, not in the sense of collapse, but of transformation. A new format is emerging, an alliance with elements of a new partnership in which Japan is ready to be more active in defense, but unwilling to remain a passive actor in trade. For Takaichi and her government, this is both an opportunity and a risk. If she can navigate skillfully between Washington and Tokyo, between defense and the economy, between alliance and sovereignty, Japan could rise to become one of the key players in the Indo-Pacific region. If not, tensions and possibly a cooling of the alliance can be expected. That is why it is worth watching closely the next steps, whether there will be public statements about trade conflicts with the United States, whether American proposals will be blocked, how Washington will respond, and whether the format of Japan-US negotiations will change. It is also important to monitor how Japan's economy and society react to these international signals. Public support for Takaichi's government is not entirely guaranteed, and in the event of economic strain or external pressure, the risks of domestic instability will increase.